2 months ago, a group called Last Generation, Letzte Generation, addressed staff members of the Catholic and Protestant Church to join their ranks. Oops, staff member of the Catholic Church, that's me. How should I react? So let us start at the beginning. Who is Last Generation? They are a group of climate activists. They chose their name because they see themselves as the last generation. The last generation who will still have the power to stop the Earth from reaching the climate tipping points. Last generation's goal is to put pressure on politicians so that they take up measures against climate change. They demand, for example, the introduction of a speed limit on German motorways, or the cancellation of debts for countries in the south of the world. They try to reach their goals by disrupting the public order until their demands are met. And as you probably know, there have been massive disruptions on different levels. The blockage, especially of motorways and busy roads, by gluing themselves to the street, is one example. Only 4 days ago, they managed to enter Berlin's airport and the runway, blocking 40 planes from taking off and landing. They attacked cultural goods by throwing tomato soup at them, as done with the Monet picture in Potsdam last month. Or by gluing themselves to the conductor's desk in the Philharmonic of Hamburg only 4 days ago. According to themselves, Last Generation is committed to the principle of civil disobedience. Civil disobedience means the breaking of the law in order to make people and politicians aware of their requests, while at the same time remaining peaceful and non-violent. But are they able to make people and politicians aware of their requests? If you follow the debate about Last Generation, you will find that it is mostly negative. Most people talk about the legitimateness of their action, but not about their concerns for the climate. Hardly in any comment does anyone mention the word climate tipping point. Hardly anyone speaks about Last Generation's motivation, saving mankind. Hardly anyone, and certainly not the politicians directly addressed, speak about debt cancellation for countries of the South or the introduction of a speed limit on motorways. Whereas most Germans say that they support the goals of Last Generation, 86% of people asked were of the opinion that the actions of Last Generation are counterproductive to the protection of the climate. This implies that Last Generation missed their goal of raising awareness. They try to make people aware of something people say they are already aware of. It's like preaching to the converted. Even worse, the answers of the German population imply that instead of causing sympathy and support for their cause, Last Generation rather puts people off the topic. Or, as I read in Berlin's newspaper Tagesspiegel the other day, this end of the world atmosphere is not going to motivate anyone. Secondly, are they peaceful and non-violent? Although Last Generation has not directly attacked or harmed people and not permanently damaged any goods, at least in the minds of many people, their peacefulness and non-violent stand are open to debate. They have been called anarchists, vandalizers, or even bioterrorists, implying that their actions have or soon will become acts of terrorism. This thinking seems to be especially prominent with the Bavarian government, who put members of last generation into prison for 30 days without being sentenced, calling it a preventive measure. They released them yesterday, by the way. The debate about how peaceful and non-violent last generation's actions are became even more virulent last month, when a cyclist in Berlin was trapped under a lorry in a traffic accident. The rescue vehicle was stuck in a traffic jam due to last generation's street blockage. The cyclist died several days later in hospital. And although the cyclist could probably not have been saved anyway, for many politicians and media, the culprits are last generation. All I just said tells me not to join last generation and their activities. I could easily deny their claim for me to join their ranks, answering from a Christian perspective. Christians are morally obliged to respect the law. Christians are morally obliged not to endanger or hurt people. Christians are morally obliged not to use blackmail. But of course, this strict no to last generation holds the danger that I and we reply with simple answers to highly complex moral questions. Luckily, a Christian perspective has more to offer. Firstly, as a Christian, I can try to interpret the actions of last generation in a prophetic light. Surely last generation do not see themselves as God sent. However, what they do is pointing loudly and drastically to the wrongs in our society and especially in our leaders. Like prophets, they annoy and anger people and rulers. Like prophets, they do not shut up in the face of power, even risking to be put in prison. Like prophets, they do not stop talking about the deadly consequences our behavior will have in future. And although last generation may be off target, by drawing more attention to their activities than to their goals, they keep the public debate alive, despite other burning topics like war, the energy crisis, and inflation. Secondly, there is a theological principle that implies that under certain circumstances, an evil can be tolerated in order to prevent a greater evil. This principle is called minus malus, or the lesser evil. Cannot the actions of last generation and their consequences be seen as the lesser evil compared to the risks to so many people's lives due to climate change? Although every life lost is one loss too many, why do so many people scream and shout about the death of a cyclist, but not mention the 15,000 that died of heat in Europe this summer alone? Who is responsible for their death? Should we not at least, if we do not actively support the activities of last generation, be the voice that asks about all those other deaths, when the public and politicians point at last generation, blaming them for endangering people? Thirdly, I would like to attempt to look at last generation in the light of today's scripture reading. The sun will be darkened and the moon will not give light. The stars will fall from the sky. and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. Catastrophes, hunger, and misery will plague the earth. Wars will be waged for the last remaining resources. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and given in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark, until the flood came and took them all away. Truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. For we are the last generation that possibly can prevent the total collapse of the earth. As you noticed, what I just cited was a mixture of today's scripture and a letter from last generation. The text of the Gospel is written as if in the words of Jesus. It is more likely, however, that the evangelist Matthew wanted to give a message to the early Christians. Directly after the death and resurrection of Jesus, his followers had been expecting his immediate return. It was therefore important to live a life according to the Gospel if you wanted to receive salvation. Something that is easier done when the end is in sight. But as time passed and Jesus had not yet returned, people started to behave more laxly. People may have even started to doubt that Jesus would come at all. Matthew's intention was to keep people alert and watchful. He intended to remind people to lead their life in a Christian way, emphasizing that the end would come when least expected, emphasizing that the consequences for those not alert would be devastating. Matthew's intention was not to scare people, to manipulate them, or to blackmail them into rightful behavior. His words speak of his true concern for the people. The direct comparison between the Bible and last generation shows that they are using biblical language and apocalyptic images as a means of expressing their honest despair and their sense of dread concerning the future. Although there might be some amongst last generation who are attention-seeking, I believe that the majority of them are truly concerned. I think it is very important to take seriously that there are people within our society who feel that way. Instead of criticizing last generation for their actions, it is necessary to ask how it is possible that the current political climate creates a group of people who feel that all is lost unless they take to drastic measures. It is necessary to discuss their statements and not their activities. Giving in to blackmail is not what a politician should do. But looking at the concerns behind blackmail is their responsibility. I also take another lesson from the comparison of today's reading with last generation. That, as Christians, we should keep on hoping against all hopelessness. Although Christ has not immediately returned, as the early believers expected, we Christians keep on believing that all will be well in the end. St. Paul asks us today to put aside the deeds of darkness and to put on the armor of light. Maybe this is our responsibility as Christians, to be as alert as the Bible and last generation want us to be, but at the same time to be optimistic in our outlook, to mobilize people for actions against climate change without painting the blackest picture. So how can I reply to last generation's address to me as a staff member of the Catholic Church? Here it comes. Dear last generation, I'm thankful to you for being prophets of our time, for putting a finger in the wound. I value that you follow your conscience. I value that you directly addressed me as a staff member of the Catholic Church, thereby forcing me to wake up from slumber and to make up my mind. Our Apostle Paul spoke of putting on our armor of light. Having looked at your positions and activities, I come to the conclusion that you are a vital part of the worldwide movement to save our climate. However, you are not the right armor of light for me personally. I need to actively search for groups, organizations, and activities that are aiming at winning the hearts of the majority of people, that are giving people hope that change is possible and that not all is lost, that are putting pressure on our politicians while being inspired by hope. And I promise I will become part of these groups this Advent. Because Advent means the beginning. And I believe that we are at the beginning and not the end. Yours sincerely, Karen.